Okay.
Welcome to everyone joining us from across the United States and around the world for this fall learning series entitled Centering Students' Identity Through Culturally Responsive Reading and Writing Practices. My name is Carol Booth-Olson, and I am the director of the Wright Center. The Wright Center is a national research and development center housed at UC Irvine and sponsored by the Institute of Education Sciences, which is dedicated to improving academic writing outcomes for secondary students. We're committed to supporting our growing community of teachers, of school leaders, educational stakeholders, and college faculty by offering resources and learning opportunities like today's event. The Wright Center, in partnership with the National Writing Project, is honored to host this 90-minute webinar entitled Teach Living Poets, Complicating the Canon, and Empowering Students Through Poetry. I'd now like to provide some digital logistics. Over 200 people are registered for this event, and we're all participating on a Zoom webinar platform. Please use the Q&A feature to ask questions directly to Jali Wang and Jake Stice, who will be serving as our moderators today. Please use the chat feature to communicate with our larger community of attendees. Jali and Jake will do their best to collect your questions, and today's speakers will get to as many as possible in the last 15 minutes of this event. If you'd like to tweet about the event, please tag us at Wright_Center and use the hashtag WrightOn21. And please stay with us to the very end of the webinar, because I'm going to be announcing a very special discount related to our all-day December virtual learning conference. Now I have the great privilege of introducing Micah Bornay and Melissa Smith. Micah Bornay was raised in the hip hop culture of Long Beach, California. He received his Bachelor of Arts degree in electronic media communications from Moody Bible Institute in Chicago. During college, he began writing and performing music and poetry. His rhythmic roots and theological training unite to birth a unique brand of creative truth-telling. And today we have the privilege of hearing Micah's artistic genius through a poetry reading, which of course goes with Melissa's whole theme of Teach Living Poets. And in the chat, you'll see a link to his book, Hear This Dreamer. Melissa Smith is the co-author of Teach Living Poets, the book with NCTE, I believe, and the Norton Guide to AP Literature. She is the 2017 District Teacher of the Year and an AP Reader and NCETA Executive Board member. Her work is focused on complicating the canon, supporting teachers, and empowering students through poetry. Before Melissa facilitates today's webinar, Michael will be presenting his poetry. So Micah, I invite you to share some of your work with us, and thank you so much.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, I will be sharing some poems. All the poems I share today are from my book. It's called Here Comes This Dreamer. So I'm just gonna jump right into it. This first poem is titled Native Tongue. According to ShakespeareOnline.com, the English language owes a great debt to Shakespeare. He invented over 1,700 of our common words by changing nouns into verbs, changing verbs into adjectives, connecting words never before used together, adding prefixes and suffixes, and devising words wholly original. If I could, I'd spit this in whatever mother tongue was ripped from our mother's lips. But the closest I got to that is hip hop, is black talk, is improper, non-proper, unproper, uneducated, educated, unscratch, assimilated we talk, our talk, make y'all wish y'all know I'm talking about talk, make y'all ask your black friend talk, make y'all run to urbandictionary.com talk, that one thing, that something that belongs to us, that us you try to demonize, envy, copy, despise, that us you try to categorize, stereotype, try to shame our broken English you wish you could understand, but you can't never get it because we stay fly, we stay fresh, we stay changed, we stay everyday new way to say we never believed your lies. We never spoke your tongue. We've been uneducated, educated, unscratched, assimilated. And if you ever want to know what we talking about, maybe you need to unlearn a thing or two. Who says our vernacular ain't classical? Who says rap lyricists are anything less than Shakespearean? Shakespeare, a man who turned nouns into verbs and invented 1,700 words. That's funny. When we break the rules, we're called ignorant. When we invent words, they're called slang. The way we talk is improper, non-proper, unproper, uneducated, un-educated, unscratched, assimilated. We ain't never been dumb. We break English like chains. This is our native tongue. I shared that one because I felt like it went quite on theme with the breaking the canon. So a good way to start out. This next poem is kind of a funny story behind it. So a few years back when Obama was still president, he made an announcement that Harriet Tubman was going to replace Andrew Jackson on the face of the $20 bill. And I remember when I heard that, I remember getting online and on Facebook, all my Black friends was wilding out. They was like so excited. I saw a Facebook status that was like, yo, I can't wait to go to the bank. Like, let me get 300, all Tubmans, please, Tubmans only. And folks was celebrating and popping champagne, you know? And it was funny because as much as like seeing that brought me joy, when I thought about what was actually happening, I didn't feel excited about it. I felt kind of bittersweet. And if I'm being honest, I felt a little more bitter than sweet about it. And I couldn't quite put my finger on why until I came across this article about the city of Boston. And after I read that article, everything clicked for me. And I was like, oh, this is why I'm not excited about this. So that's where this poem comes from. It's titled Lament for Mother Tubman. The median net worth for non-immigrant African-American households in the greater Boston region is $8. The household median net worth was $247,500 for whites. The color of wealth in Boston, a 2015 report by the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston, Duke University, and the New School. America promises to print Harriet Tubman on a $20 bill, a cruel and unusual honor. Let the faces of greed remain on their God. Give Caesar what belongs to Caesar, but keep my mama out your filthy palms. Remember all the nothing that changed when this nation literally tokenized Sacagawea in fake gold? Remember how indigenous people still live in squalor? You can't blackface a dollar and call it reparations. Newly bred Tubmans crammed into privileged wallets, sardined in bank vaults like the hulls of slave ships. Businessmen pass a pimp a stack of Harriets to rape a teenage sex slave with African hips, while Mother Tubman's daughters and sons struggle to keep the heat on. In Boston, a Black father dies after decades of wanting to. New England's bitterness finally froze his will to hope. He left his family a modest inheritance, a suicide note apology, $8, and a special edition Celtics jersey. In Boston, a Black mother dies after decades of refusing to. After freedom marches and protests, after cancer stole both breasts, after spending her savings on saving herself, she leaves her daughter a closet full of church hats, an award-winning cornbread recipe, and a family Bible with $8 hidden in Philippians 4:19. My God will supply every need. America really believes they doing us a favor, painting our faces on their dreams, writing in God we trust on this blasphemous economy, assigning net worth to human beings. Life ought to be priceless, but only the breath of the highly appraised gets protected. No wonder this nation considered us more useful as slaves. Capitalism ascribes an $8 value to free Black lives. If Mother Tubman were alive today, she would need 2.5 selves before she was worth the weight of her very own bill. So yeah, that article, The Color of Wealth in Boston, had that, it was written in 2015, and it had that staggering statistic of the median net worth for Black families in the Boston region was $8 versus white families, which was $247,500. And I was just like, what? And it gets frustrating when you're talking about racial issues. A lot of times folks with black folks who aren't black, they're like, why are you so stuck on the past? And I'm like, I'm not mad about the past. I'm mad about right now. I'm mad about $8 versus 247,500. And when I think about Harriet Tubman particularly, the fact that she was considered an enemy of the state, that there was a cash prize on her head. America was going to pay you to capture her or kill her. The fact that slavery itself was driven by greed, right? Free labor. And the way you want to honor this woman's legacy is by putting her face on money while Black people are still $8. That's an insult to me. That is meaningless tokenism, quite literally tokenism. And it pissed me off. And I was like, I don't want a black face on a dollar. I want justice. You know what I mean? So I'm gonna share one more, and I think my time is up because I talked too much. Let me see. Which one do I want to share? I'll share this one. This poem is titled "Tenderheaded." Most us boys is tenderheaded. Black girls been yanked at the root since before they can remember. They already know how much the magic cost. First time mama gave me braids, I seen the face of Jesus. I twitched and screamed like that kitchen table was Guantanamo Bay. Boy, sit still. Boy, you already got so much hair, just watch. This'll make it grow even more. I ain't never checked the science of that, but all Black folks I know believed it. I had dreams of afro tall as white girls' hair be long. So every 2 weeks, I sat through torture, let mama or big sister twist my natural into cornrows, crop circles, zigzags, triangles, loop-de-loops, wherever their heavy-handed spirit would lead. After a while, I squirmed less, and less. Then one day, it didn't hurt no more at all. Matter of fact, it felt good. Hands of Black prophetess pulling the stress right out my head, soothing my soul, making me prettier with every touch. For hours, we'd talk and talk and talk. I confessed a bunch of things I didn't plan on telling mama. I asked a bunch of questions I never knew only my sister could answer. Things I would never mention in a gut-busting, chest-beating barber shop. Things they wouldn't know what to do with anyway. Most us boys is tender-headed. This kind of pain, this kind of comfort, are mine too soft. This mind needs a woman's touch. Mama grabbed me by the roots, yanked them hard as she knew how. They grew. So again, all of those were selections from my book, Here Comes This Dreamer. Per request, the last thing I just want to say real quick is, it's interesting because I'm a poet and a musician as well, but I did not write poetry in high school, and I actually thought I hated poetry. And I thought I hated poetry because the only type of poetry I was exposed to, I didn't even understand. Like, it wasn't even like I didn't like it, I just didn't get it. And I associated poetry as like something for like super academic or wealthy or like high class people. And that wasn't me. You know what I'm saying? Like, I was inner city from a poor family. And I'm like, well, if poetry is for smart people and I don't even understand it, then number one, I guess I'm not smart. And then also, it ain't for me. Why am I gonna like something when I don't even understand what they're saying? So I had zero interest in it. And it was funny because I didn't like hate poetry in principle. I hate it experientially because I was only exposed to like, Shakespeare or Emily Dickinson or Robert Frost. They were from cultures and times that just weren't mine at all. And I didn't relate to. And literally the very first time I saw poetry that I felt connected to, I loved it. It took one invitation. I was in college and one of my homies invited me to like an open mic where folks was doing spoken word poetry. And I had seen it on YouTube, but I'd never seen it in person before. But I went that night. I had never written a poem, spoken word poem in my life. And I just saw it. And by the end of the night, I was like, I want to do this. This is amazing. Because I saw people, they weren't just all Black and they weren't all young. It was a pretty diverse crowd, but it was folks speaking in language that I understood. And they were talking about a world that I recognized and related to. And that's all it took. I was like, this is dope. But it wasn't like I want to be a vocational poet. It was just like, I want to write so I can participate in this open mic community. This is a dope space. So anyway, I do really think about, man, if younger living spoken word poets came to my high school and my middle school, and, I'm in California, I'm in Long Beach, this is a pretty like liberal, progressive place. And still almost all my teachers were white. And all of the, poets we read for the most part were white and dead. And, like we read Shakespeare in middle school and again in high school. We read Robert Frost, we read Emily Dickinson, all of the people that you expected, but we didn't read any Black and brown poets that spoke in a way that I recognize, So yeah, but when I got into it, it opened up so much for me. Like I realized I wasn't stupid, and I realized that poetry is actually a really beautiful art form that can bring about so much healing and community. So thanks for having me. I will be sticking around and checking out what Melissa have to say, but I'm done. Yeah.
So Micah, thank you so much. That was so amazingly powerful. I'm sure you were not looking at the chat because you were busy reading your poetry, but I'll just read you two comments you got. Micah, you are a gift and I'm applauding, you just can't see me. So there were so many kind of wows. I wanted to say my favorite line in your first poem was "We break English like chains." That was just incredible. And in your Harriet poem about the cruel and unusual honor, I believe I'm correct that the ultimate irony is that Harriet actually purchased the freedom of both of her parents for $20 per person. So that's, kind of a pretty incredible irony. Anyway, we're looking forward to having you come at the Q&A at the end and join Melissa to respond to panelists' questions. And now we're going to turn to Melissa and her presentation on Teach Living Poets.
Wow, thank you so much. And what Micah said there at the end is everything, right? It is why Teach Living Poets is a thing, because our students, they need it, they want it, and once they get it, they love it. And me seeing my students love something, and especially something as important to me as poetry, just like lights my fire, right? It fills my teacher heart with joy and it makes me love coming to work every day. So I'm going to start getting into this here. I have a lot to cover, so I'm so excited. Thank you so much, Right Center, for having me here today. Let me get this going here. Okay. So our tagline for Teach Living Poets is complicating the canon and empowering students through poetry. And just like Micah was saying, sorry, I'm clicking some things. Just like Micah was saying, he only saw that old, dead, white, cis, heteronormative type poet in his learning. And so he wasn't exposed to all of the truly incredible and amazing artists that are out there right now doing the work and writing about the things that our students care about and that they can relate to. And so first of all, I just want to touch on some of the core values for Teach Living Poets. And that is, we just want to push as much poetry out as we can to teachers so that they can get into their classrooms. And so it's poets of all different walks from all different places, because you really need to take into account who's sitting in your classroom, who are your students, and what poets do you think, or what individual poems even do you think are going to speak to your students. And so we are kind of a double-sided coin in that we want to present poems in our classrooms that both our students can relate to and see themselves in, no matter who they are, and also poetry from different perspectives, people who are different than them, so they can learn about other people's experiences. And so, of course, along with that too, we really seek to not just complicate the canon, but open the door wider for the voices that are, taught in the classroom. Because like he was saying, it's Robert Frost, Emily Dickinson, And not to say that we should not teach those poets, because I do think it's important to see how, you know, the ancestor poets are in conversation with our poets from today. So I don't think we should close the door on the canon completely, but opening the door wider to allow more voices to come through. And if we're going to do that, we definitely need to focus and really center and highlight the voices of Black poets, LGBTQ+ poets, Indigenous poets, and poets with disabilities. Like, make that a mission, right? And so we really just celebrate poetry and all of the amazingness. Micah was just reading those poems, and the first poem, I felt goosebumps. The next one made me angry, right? The next one, I was laughing. So we have like these physical reactions to poems. And I'm actually going to talk a little bit about that as one of the ways to get our students engaged with poetries. And of course, too, having our students write poetry, right? Can't just want to read it, we want to write it too. So back when, let's see, I would say about 7-8 years ago, I didn't teach any contemporary poetry at all. I was all Dickinson and Frost and Whitman because I was scared. I was scared because it was new. I was scared because I was never taught these new poems. There's no Spark Notes or no like lessons pre-made that I can download and then just push out to my students. Some of the topics are quite mature or controversial, some people would say. And so I was afraid I was going to have parent complaints and just all these fears. And once you try it, it's really hard to go back once you see your students' reaction to it. So what I really had to do when I started teaching living poets and making it really a focus of my class is I had to change the dynamics of how I approached poetry in the classroom with my students. And so what I really needed to do was just shut up, really. I just needed to stop talking for a second and let the students do the exploring of the poem and the thinking of the poem. And so I really had to shift a lot of the instruction to be student-centered learning, a lot of collaboration, discussion, and allowing them to, discover the poems for themselves instead of me up there on the stage, we read a poem and then I'm like, okay, so what does that mean? Or where do you find a metaphor? Or those questions that students are, they feel like there's a right and wrong answer, and then they get intimidated because they're afraid to be wrong. And I think that's a lot of their experience thus far with poetry, coming up from the grades before you, in that when I get students every year, at the beginning of the year, I ask them, so I love poetry. What do you guys think about poetry? And they're like, they don't like it. And it's always my mission every year to change their minds. So I love these C's, right? Because this is what I try to focus on when I'm planning lessons, and a bunch of stuff I'm about to share with you today is that with the student-centered Teach Living Poets mindset, these are the things I focus on. So conversation, you got to get students talking to each other and not just to me and what they think I want to hear about a poem. Choice, I think offering student choice is so integral in like all aspects of everything, but especially when it comes to poetry, because it's so subjective, right? And it's so, you can relate to this certain poet, but maybe not that one so much. So it's really great when you can allow them to pick who they want to read or which poem they want to do or whatever. Collaboration, getting them to work together. Creation, having them write their own poems. And then finally, connection, which is one of the awesomest parts about Teach Living Poets, is that you can actually like meet poets and go see readings and follow them on social media and email them a question and DM them a question if they're cool with that. But yeah, so many different ways that we can connect with poets. And so our students can see that, living, breathing people are actually doing this, and they're really cool people. So you should check them out, right? So if you're going to teach a single poem to your class, I have some activities that might be helpful to you to approach poetry in maybe a different way. So this was actually something I did on the very first day of school. Instead of going over the syllabus, is I cut out these strips. It was Maggie Smith's poem, Good Bones. And so I cut sentence strips and I laid them all out, and those were like lines from her poem. And students had to organize them in the order that they thought. And it sounds so simple, right? But the discussions that they were having of why they thought one line came before another line was just truly remarkable. And I didn't do anything but walk around the room and listen. And like my little teacher heart was just going ta 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 ta, so happy. And you could also do this virtually too. My good friend, colleague, Susan Barber in Atlanta, Georgia, created a virtual version of this too, where students are just moving around text boxes that have lines in them. If you needed a virtual lesson, I know we all have needed one of those lately every once in a while. Another cool thing is to remove punctuation from a poem. So if a poem has like commas, periods, dashes, all that, you give them a copy of the poem with all of that removed. And then on the side, you have like a punctuation bank of all of the different ones that are in there. And then students try to figure out what goes where. Again, the conversations that they have. And really what they're doing is they're talking about the syntax of the poem. They're talking about, you know, the chunks of meaning, right? So they're actually doing analysis in disguise, right? Like they don't know that they're doing it, but they're doing it. And then of course you show them the answer with all the poem, the punctuation, and they're like, oh, and they get excited if they get it right. And don't ever grade these things too, y'all. Like it's just for fun, right? It's just to play and explore and like get to know poetry in a low stakes kind of environment. Very similar to removing punctuation. I love removing the line breaks and stanza breaks. And I actually have a whole lesson on the Teach Living Poets website. It's called The Lesson in the Poetic Line. And it uses Gwendolyn Brooks's We Real Cool, and then it uses Terrence Hayes's Golden Shovel from that poem. And so really cool lesson there. You can just click on the image. I did put a link to my slides PS in the chat. So y'all could pull it up because there's tons of hyperlinks that take you to like the full description of the lesson or of the thing. Tricolor annotations is another way to get your students talking about a poem together. And, you know, there's like no right or wrong answers. So again, this is linked to further explanation, but basically just print out a poem, any poem, give it to the kids, be like, all right, kids, read the poem. And in one color, write down some notes. What do you notice, right? What line stands out to you? Underline it. Just really general kind of open-ended questions. And then after a few minutes, everyone looks like they're done. You pair them up with someone. It's like a think, pair, share, only through writing. And every time you're using a different color. And by the third round, like they're in a very large group, or if you have a small enough class, you could do a whole class discussion too. But it's really cool to see them walk through this poem and discover things together through conversation. And that's actually one of my former students' handouts there. And y'all, all these pictures were these are my students, and they have given me permission. Thank you so much to them. But if they don't have masks on, is because it was from pre-COVID. So a lot of my students, the fall of 2019, is taking a lot of these pictures. Head, heart, and gut is a really fun way too to enter into a poem. So students read the poem, and they're like, well, I don't know what to do. And you could ask them this question. And this is from Scott Bayer, who's one of the co-leads of the book chat on Twitter. Amazing. You should totally check it out if you haven't. But his idea was you could ask the students, does this poem, when you read it, does it hit you in your head? Does it make you think something? Does it hit you in your heart? Does it make you feel something? Or does it hit you in the gut? Just like, oh, right? Makes you, maybe you feel some kind of guttural reaction to it, right? Or you could kind of use this in a different way with one poem, do all three things. Like, is there anything in this one poem that makes you think, makes you feel, resonates with you? And that could, it's a discussion starter, right? So the student's like, well, I think it's a heart poem, and this is why I think. And then they go back in and they find like the textual evidence to support their answer. Tone bottles are so fun. Oh, and I wish I had an example here to show you, but this was an idea from a colleague out on the coast of North Carolina, Valerie Person, and she loved this. They're called calming bottles, and they're used in therapy for anxiety and stress. And so she was like, I could do something with this. And so we use it as a poetry activity where your students are filling up these recycled water bottles with different food coloring and glitter and sequins, and all that represents different aspects of the poem. And so it's very hands-on. They're all like chatting and sharing glitter together. It is a mess, but it's definitely worth the mess. And their analysis of the poems and matching it with the different colors and textures of glitter is just really remarkable. And again, I'm not doing any teaching, right? I'm just walking around and observing, and that is linked there because there's like a very specific recipe you have to use to make it swooshy and cool. The tone bottle action. Yay, pop-up poetry time. Okay, so I do this in my own classroom. Some days, we're driving with a lesson, I'll just like stop, pop-up poetry time. Or some days an entire class will be devoted to a pop-up poem. So this is actually one I did with my students, and we're gonna do it right now, and you are welcome to use it with your students one day to your heart's desire. So if you have a scrap sheet of paper around you, or maybe your notes in your phone or somewhere where you can write or text or type something, we're gonna do this little activity. And what's really cool is the Right Center is actually going to create a zine based on all the fall series conferences. So if what you produce today with this pop-up poetry, there's this one and there's gonna be another one later, you could potentially be published in the Right Center's zine. So what a cool opportunity. And so your writing, if you submit it, could end up in there. So what are we gonna do? I need your sheet to look like this. And so I hand out to each of my students a blank printer paper sheet. And I tell them to draw these lines. You could also, I guess, pre-make it and make copies for them with the boxes. All right, here we go. In the first box up there on the top left, we'll take 1 minute. I'm going to set the timer on my phone, and I want you to write a list of things that you remember playing with as a child. And these could be things you played with inside or outside, toys, games, make-believe things you did, right? So what are things you remember playing with as a child? Just a list of things. And let me get my timer here while y'all get ready to write. All right, are we ready? 1 minute on the clock, starting now, go. I'm gonna do it too. Okay, that's time. All right, now we're gonna move on to the second column. Now I want you to think about your life today and what occupies your time now, right? As kids, our lives were just full of play and fun. And so what is your life full of right now? What do you do on a daily basis? Just a list of what occupies your life today in the now time. And details are always a bonus here. All right, 1 minute on the clock, go. Time's up. Third column. This is stolen from one of my favorite poetry podcasts that isn't around anymore, but is several years old at this point, I think. It was three poets, Jose Olivares, John Sands, and Aziza Barnes, and they had a podcast called The Poetry Gods. And they would bring a poet on every episode and just like talk. And one of the questions that they always asked the poet was, what's on your mind? And so that's this column. What's on your mind? What is going on right now? It could be in your personal life. It could be in the news. It could be in the world, but something that is just on your mind, whether it's a good way or a bad way. Maybe it just like is weighing on your heart, or maybe it's bringing you joy. You got some good news. What's on your mind? Third column, 1 minute, make a list. Phrases is okay. Let's do this. All right, that's time for that one. So in that bottom section, it's time to write the poem. And this poem's kind of a play on before and after, or then and now. And when I ask my students to write a poem for pop-up poetry, I will always give them guidelines that they can follow if they choose to, but they don't have to. Sometimes they just want to write what they want to write, and that's cool. But sometimes they don't know how to start. And so I'll try to provide them with like, okay, you need to do X, Y, and Z. And by giving them just a couple of rules and like how to start and where to go with the thing, it helps them to, I guess, write. So I'm going to show you some guidelines, for example, that I might give them. And you can use these if you want, but you don't necessarily have to. I would just ask that your poem does have, that idea of then and now, or before and after, using your boxes, right? So I want you to draw from your 3 boxes there, and you're going to pull that inspiration into your poem. You can use words specifically from your boxes, but you don't have to. You can just use it as inspiration. So the guidelines I have, in a way to start is always a good guideline option. So I want you to start the first line with either then or before, pick one. And then before you get to the middle of the poem, I want you to have 3 lines using anaphora. So using the same word at the beginning of the line for 3 lines in a row. And then I want you to shift the poem in the middle with either a then or a now. And then the same thing, 3 anaphora lines. And maybe your poem will only be 8 lines, but you know, that's up to you. So let me check our time here. Let's write for, this is gonna be a quick one, 3 minutes, because I have another pop-up poetry one I want to do with you, and I don't want to run out of time for that one. So go 3 minutes. It's gonna be real fast, so make it short and sweet maybe. Are you ready? Let's do this. Timer starts now. I'll give you a 1-minute warning. 1 minute. All right, time's up. I know that was really, really fast. And normally I would give my students at least 5 minutes, but not much longer, right? This is pop-up poetry. It's supposed to be kind of fast to get your ideas down. And so if you want to play with that a little bit more later and maybe potentially submit that for the zine, that would be super fun. And I do always want to celebrate my students' work when they write something. And so it's a, what do you call it? It's a procedure. Oh, that's such a yucky word for this, but something we basically do every time we do this is they go around and share. They don't have to read their whole poem because that's a lot, right? And some do, some will, but they have to share at least one line. And so if you wrote a poem, could you maybe drop one of your lines in the chat? Because that's just how I do things. So, and then we always snap every time the student shares the line. So you're basically just snapping for like a good 6 minutes as the kids go around the room and share. You just snap, snap, snap. But it feels good to be celebrated, even if it's just for one line, right? So to get that little affirmation is important, I think, right? And then students know for the next time, like, this is what we do. We share every time, even if it's just one line, that's okay. Nothing wrong with one line. Make it be your fire line, right? So a thing that I would encourage you to do is not just teach individual poems, but to actually consider teaching a poetry collection, like all these loves behind me, my book babies. Teach a poetry collection as a whole class text. So, you know, how many novels do you teach in any given year at, you know, in an English classroom? So, and I'm talking all English classes, right? I'm not talking just creative writing or just a poetry class. I mean, you know, your 11th grade American literature core English class, because that's what I teach. These are all collections I've actually taught before. And so there's so much value, honestly, in teaching a poetry collection. And the analysis that kids can do with it is just as important and just as impressive and just as deep as they can do with any other text, like a novel or something. And so there's lots of different things you can look at when you read a collection with a class. And pick one you think your students will gravitate towards, you know, that is by a poet who they might relate to. Or I've also done choice, right? So I have like 3 options that they could do. We did like lit circles with them. That was really fun. But anyways, what's really cool is that all poetry collections, similar to a work of fiction, you know, have a journey that the reader goes on as they read through the work, and like looking at that first poem and seeing how it serves as a foundation, and looking at the last poem and seeing how it serves as like the ultimate closing for the book. What does it leave us with, that last poem? Does it leave us with questions, or with an emotion, or with an image? What patterns do we see throughout? All these things that we can look at, similar to when we look at novels, but we're looking at them now this time through a poetry collection. And I do want to just quickly clarify what a poetry collection is. I don't mean an anthology, right? Although those are great too. I mean a single volume poetry collection, which is just by one poet, and it's, you know, like they made it as their poetry book. So Clint Smith, I've taught him for a few years now. That's always my students love Clint Smith. So if you're not sure who to start with, there's a suggestion for you. But lots of options, like infinity almost options out there. And there's on the Teach Living Poets website a tab called Find Poets, where that might be a good place to look if you're not sure of who you want to teach. But one of the things that's kind of cool to look at is considering the order of the poems, because poets put a lot of thought into that. And so this is from a poet who's local here. He teaches at a college nearby, but he was on a writing retreat and Instagram these pictures of him like creating a 3-dimensional space with his poems, because that's how we want his book to be when the readers experience it. He wants them to be like they're entering into a space, like the room of his mind, I think he called it, which I think is so cool. And then what can we compare that to, right? That's kind of a nebulous idea for students. So we might think of an album, and like you can see how old I am here with the Thriller album, but you could do this with like Taylor Swift or Kendrick Lamar or whoever the kids are listening to these days. But the order that their albums go in regards to pacing and topics and subjects and mood and all that stuff, you know, get them thinking about that first and then think about the poetry book. Project Runway is another fun comparison. And this is Christian Siriano's final Runway. I think it was season 4 that he won way back in the day. But the way that the outfits come out, right? The order in which the fashion designer presents them is similar to like the poems in the book. Before we even crack the book, some things you can look at and preview, you know, what do you think this book's going to be about? Like just based on the titles of the poems, based on the blurb on the back, based on the cover, right? So just kind of predicting some things. And there's a ton of really awesome activities you can do when you're teaching collections that are very hands-on, collaborative, engaging students in those conversations, like we were talking about the individual poems. So hexagonal thinking is kind of like a thing right now. And so definitely you can do this with a poetry collection where you have the titles of poems on these hexagons and students are placing them together to show the connections. Like if the sides of the hexagons are touching, there's a connection between those two poems. And like beyond, of course, that they're all in the same book. And then they write the connection explanations there on the side on the hexagons. The envelope game is so simple. You can do this with any text, really. It doesn't have to be a poetry collection, but on little slips of paper, you just write down the different symbols, the different images, the different themes, the different allusions that the poet or the text uses, and then you randomly shove them into envelopes, and students will get an envelope with like 3 or 4 cards on it, and they have to create connections between those 3 or 4 items, and then, you know, write an explanation of how those things are working together in the text to create meaning. And that's always fun because some of them would get really random cards. This is the cards for Safia El Hello's The January Children, which I taught a couple years ago. Poem threading, as you can see, I like hands-on things. I like manipulatives. And so poster board and yarn is what you need for this. And I printed out 5 or 6 poems from the book that I felt were really like highlight standout poems. And students have to show me the connections that they can create in between the poems by like literally using thread, right? So we're threading around the poster board to show these connections, and each color yarn stands for different things. I know I'm going so fast, but all these things are on the Teach Living Poets website, like all the different directions. And of course, students have to write, right? And sometimes just to give them a blank sheet of paper and say, go for it, some students might be a little intimidated. So I love after poems. The idea of them is that after we're done reading the collection, pick your favorite poem and then write your own poem kind of inspired by that, right? So model your own poem to kind of follow that, your inspiration poem, your mentor text poem. I have some examples, I think, here. Clint Smith, the very first poem in his book's called Something You Should Know. And I actually did this year as a early on activity because his poem is, you know, introducing himself basically. And so my students introduced themselves through their own little poems that were fashioned after Something You Should Know. And I also did this last year, and kids, man, they will share some stuff with you. I tell you what, when you get them to write creatively and like having this opportunity for personal expression, if they know they're in a safe space, like they might share some stuff with you, some really important stuff that they probably felt like they needed to share. So I just encourage you to give them these opportunities to write as frequently as possible. And I know it's hard, right? Because we all have tests we have to prep for and stuff, but I think just finding that balance is something I know I seek to do. So, oh, here's another one, Ode to Julia, which is based off of Ode to Cheese Fries. Or there's other odes in his book too. I think there's an ode to Scottie Pippen, maybe, or some basketball player in Citizen Illegal. Resources. Oh my gosh, obviously the website, teachlivingpoets.com. There's so much on there, you all. And I make this myself, and I'm sorry, I'm not like a web designer. So maybe one day I'll get someone to help me out, but there's all these awesome tabs. And I want to show you a couple specifically. The virtual library. This is another amazing place if you're not sure who to start with, or if you just want your students to explore some poets. There's 25-ish poets in here, and all those little hexagons are links to their work, to videos by them, their biographies, their websites, and they just get to know like a little snapshot of each poet if they want to choose one from the library to then focus on for an assignment. Or like you could have groups do lit circles with the poet. So many things you could do. It's a really good like little curation that myself and Scott Bayer from the book chat, who I mentioned before with the Head, Heart, and Gut, we created this, and it's pretty cool. There's also some like very personalized videos in there from the poets themselves. If you see this little logo, the Teach Living Poets logo, that's a video of the poets talking. Hyperdocs, yo, I needed these so bad last year, so we made a bunch of them for virtual learning, but you could use it for sub plans. That's what I do. Oh crap, Hyperdoc, push it out, there we go. But these Hyperdocs are all focused on a ELA skill. So there's imagery, characterization, juxtaposition, structure, all the different skills, point of view. And so they bring your students through like a lesson. There's like a warm-up thing, and then there's a mini lesson, and then there's a guided thing, and then there's sometimes a teacher video in there, and then there's a writing part at the end. So they're just like these little nuggets of poetry lessons all kind of bundled up for you. And those are all on the Teach Living Poets website. They're all free. Go check them out. Every winter, usually January or February, we do a student Twitter chat. It's a slow chat throughout the day, so we can get both coasts. And we'll be planning one again for this winter. It was so awesome last year. We got to do it on Amanda Gorman's inaugural poem. And I don't know who we're going to do yet this year, so be on the lookout for that, and your students can participate. And it's really cool because you're creating that connection between your students and other students across the country, all talking about poetry. Like, how cool is that? And then also speaking about connecting with the poets, bringing them into the classroom, no matter if it's a local poet or a poet that your kids have read, and you fly them in, or you could do a virtual visit too, right? Especially nowadays. But it's the best day of the year. It's just the best day of the year. That's all I can say about it. And I encourage you to just ask, right? You're like, oh, I don't know. They're probably going to say, no, we can't really afford much. And I get it, right? Like, we have to fundraise like a lot to bring our poets in, but A, pay your poet, okay? Pay your poet. Honorariums, absolutely. And then B, if they say no, like, they're very busy people. They often are professors or, working full-time jobs too. And so they might just be busy, right? And just ask someone else and keep asking, because that one that says yes, like, that's the one who was meant to be. And your students are gonna have a blast with them, I promise. And just the experience for the kids to see someone who maybe looks like them, who talks like them, who like talks about the things that they care about and that they're angry about and that they love and that they're interested in. At least, and the poet becomes not just a name on the spine of a book, right? Not just an abstract idea of a poet in like an ivory tower, but it's like a real live, really awesome human being. So it's just so cool. Totally do it. Oh, and I have a book. Oh, yay. There's my book. You can order it from NCT if you want to. Okay. Finally, last pop-up poetry. Are we ready? I do have a handout for this one. That link right there, Shades of Green, will bring you to a post where you can download this handout. But you could just do it on a regular sheet of paper or in your phone notes, wherever you did the last one. And this one I did when I taught The Great Gatsby, and we talked about the green light symbolism. You could do it with any book or just for fun, like on its own. Any book that uses color in a meaningful way, or anytime color comes up in any kind of important way in your lessons. Or like I said, you could just totally do it for fun because it's really awesome. And you get your students thinking like a poet. And y'all are about to be amazed at this. I swear it's like mind blowing. All right, so up on my board, I went to the craft store and I got colored paper, different shades of the same color. So I call it shades of green. I also have shades of blue. I like to do it twice in the year because it's just so fun. And I hang them up on my board up at the front of the room. I'm in my classroom right now, actually. I actually have them up there right now. And so the students look at them and they're numbered. And I have them write down words that they associate with that color. Don't describe the color, but words you associate. So let's look at number 1 here, right? I think slime. I think Nickelodeon. I think, what do you think, right? And I have them write down 3-4 words for each of the colors. And that's the first step. So we're going to do that for each of these 5 colors. Can you write down in separate lists? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, make a list for each one. Let's go 3 words that you associate when you see that color. Okay, let's do this. Ten seconds. All right. So what I would ask my students to do next, and they choose when they do this. So some will come up, some will sit for a minute and then come up in a second. But I ask them to choose 4 words that they've written down anywhere for any number, it doesn't matter. I want you to choose your 4 favorite and go write them on the board. So that's what we're going to do in the chat. I want you to pick your 4 favorite words for whatever reason and type them separately in the chat. So like 1 word, enter, 1 word, enter, 1 word, enter. And this is going to be our word bank for a poem that we're eventually going to write here. But I need your words, okay? Yes, candy stick, Play-Doh, go. I love it. I'm going to put some too. This is our word bank. Ooh, look at these words. And I always make a really big deal to be super dorky about stuff and be like, oh my gosh, me too. I totally thought that. And just like being really affirming and, you know, making them feel like they did something real awesome right there, writing those words down. but not being disingenuous, because oftentimes they do come up with really awesome words. And so it genuinely makes me just like really excited because I know where this is going to go. Okay, thank you everybody so much for your words. So the next step, keep them coming, y'all. The next step of this, and I have a box down here on my sheet, it says word combos. So all the words are on the board, right? And they're back at their desks. And I tell them, I want you to look at all those words. And now we're thinking like a poet. Ready? What we're going to do is we're going to create word combos using two words from different lists and putting them together to create really interesting, unique, really random, creative word pairs of things that wouldn't normally go together. So like, what do we have? Let me look at our chat here. Serious nail polish, right? Like that's not a thing, but it's like cool at the same time. So I need us all to kind of scroll back through the chat and find some words from some friends. And you can also use your own words on your paper too. Those are still in the mix, okay? So with your own words and with the words in the chat, I want you to create five interesting, creative, weird, unique, random word pairs, okay? Oh, and you could even do threes if you wanted, make it a triple. Let's do this. Oh, look at these words. Ooh. Ooh. One minute. Ooh. J. Crew. Lisa Frank. Oh my gosh, I loved Lisa Frank, the stickers. Okay, so now, yes, you're already doing it. Yeah, type in the word pairs. I'm sorry, I didn't say to do that. So as my students are working on their word pairs, I would also work on some. And then I would go up and erase the board. And then I would have them pick two of their favorite word pairs and write those on the board. And these get really exciting because they're always so cool and so weird and so creative and just so unique. They're not things we would think about normally, right? Our brain would never put those two things together. And so now we're thinking like a poet, or at least I think we are. So the last step is to write a poem, of course. And so this is how we'll close out today. We got I think about 10 minutes before the Q&A. And I wanted to spend more time with this one because I think this one often just like produces better, more creative poems. And so, like I said earlier, I always give my students some like optional guidelines. And since I said we were reading The Great Gatsby, I had them have the option to write about, pretend like you're at a Gatsby party. That's it. Just like pretend you're at a Gatsby party. What do you see? Now write a poem using as many words as you can from your sheet and that you see on the board, as many word combos and as many individual words that you still have written on your sheet to just like put as many as you can in this poem. They don't have to write about that. If something's inspiring them, you know, they could write about whatever they want. So you think about what you want to write about. Do you want to write about the book that you're currently teaching? Do you want to write about some thing that just happened to you? It's your choice, y'all. But as an option, you could think about like a scene in a book, right? And pretend like you were in that scene. So are you ready? Are we gonna do this? We're gonna do this. Okay. And then I will have you actually in the last minute, share a line, just like I asked my students to do. I'll have you share a line in the chat. So let's write for 8 minutes. No, 7 minutes. 7 minutes. Okay. I started the timer.
Melissa, are you asking us to use words that we found in the chat, those word combinations? All right.
Yes.
Thanks so much
That's
for
like,
clarity.
oh, sure. Sorry. It's so sometimes like since I do this, I feel like I miss explaining some things, right? But yeah, totally use all the words in the chat, the word combos, the individual words, plus all the words on your sheet, all these words. Yes. 2 minutes. All right, we have about 20 seconds left. Finish up, and when you're ready, drop your favorite line in the chat. Ooh, I just saw a question in the chat about have any of these strategies been researched? Yes, actually. I had Ronnie Stevens wrote a really lovely article about teaching living poets and his experience with it. He tweeted it out, I want to say just like recently. Ronnie Stevens. I think it was for part of his PhD program. And that's one I know of for sure, but people are always asking me like, hey, is it okay if I cite you in my research? I'm like, okay, sure. I'll try to find that article he wrote. It's really great. And thank you everyone for sharing your lines. Oh my goodness, look at these. So my students would be going around saying these and we would be snapping for them, of course. And just a quick note too, you know, as you saw, I was doing these activities with you. And I think that is really important that when your students, when you're doing these, any kind of writing in your class, especially creative writing, I always encourage you to do it with the students because I think that that shows that you value that activity for whatever reason, and you want to do it too. And so I think that shows a lot for your students. Oftentimes actions speak louder than words. So I would encourage you, even if you do it 5 times in a day like I did, do it every time. Do it every time. All right. Are there any questions, Janelle?
Yes, we have lots of questions. So we'll see what we can get to this afternoon. The first question, let's go ahead and just come back to the theme of this learning series, focusing on culturally responsive reading and writing practices. Now, I know you mentioned this, Melissa, but can you remind us again of the space that we can go to as we're thinking about inviting poets' voices and their work into classrooms so that they represent the students that we teach? Can you remind us again of that link that we might go to on your website to do so, and then other strategies for doing that?
So I think there's 2 places you could start, and that is the virtual library. So you could like kind of browse through those 25 poets and take a look at a couple of their poems that they have posted online, and watch the videos that they left for the teachers and the students. And then the second one was there's a tab on teachlivingpoets.com. It says find poets. So that's another place. And I would also, encourage you to reach out and check out if you're like the city that you're close by, if there's a slam team or a spoken word team. We have an amazing Charlotte slam team. And so connecting with them, highly, highly recommend tapping into your local poets too.
Thank you. And Micah, if folks wanted to reach out to you, maybe how would they go about doing that?
Yeah, super easy. Everything is just my first and last name. My website is Micah Bornet, my.com, my Instagram, Facebook. It's all just, there's no layers. You send a message through there, it'll go straight to me. And I would just reiterate what Melissa was saying about like both the like poetry slams and just general open mics. Again, I didn't get into poetry because of famous celebrity poets. It was actually several years before I even thought maybe people like who do this are famous. I got into the community just by going to local open mics and by other folks who I was inspired by, poets who were, my age or just getting started or been doing it for years, whatever, but none of them were really famous. It wasn't until years later where I even thought to look up famous people. It was all about the community of local poetry that excited me about it.
That's beautiful. So this kind of goes, we're going to now kind of think about the classroom a little bit more. And this question is for both of you. What do you think is the best way for students to like listen to or read a poem? Should they be like reading on their own first? Should they listen to it? How many times should they listen to a poem? And this is a question from Jake.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on the poem, like there's certain poems that can work for both the page and performed, but a lot of my spoken word pieces, I didn't put in my book because I didn't write them to be read on a paper. And it just feels different, and you can like read it aloud, but yeah, I think depending on what type of poetry you're teaching, I definitely think if it's written as a spoken word piece, the best initial way to experience it is to watch a video if they have one, and then also print it out and break it down. But yeah, because I mean, with spoken word, the performance is just as much a part of the art as the words themselves,
Retweet, totally agree, yes.
Fantastic. Oh, here's a question about literature circles. So Crystal asked, do you have any recommended sets of poetry for literature circles?
Like poetry collections? Is that what she means?
I think that's what she means, yes.
Oh, wow. I mean, there's the ones that I've taught that were in the slide. There was like a picture of, I think it was 6 of them. Those are all great, easy to teach in the classroom. But really, honestly, I think you have to take into account your population of students and, think about what poets are going to speak to them, right? And obviously, too, you have to love it yourself. So like, just what do you like, right? Start there and see where that takes you. I don't know. I feel like I do a new one every year. So I don't have like a set playlist that I do. Micah, do you have any suggestions?
Well, I think like you said earlier, it's so subjective, right? Like there are poets who I can acknowledge are good at writing, but I don't necessarily enjoy their work. I think it's good. It just don't do nothing for me, So there's just so many poets out there. I mean, I definitely have my favorites. Whenever I get put on the spot, I can't remember any of them. But yeah, there's some books that I like. There's some spoken word poets that I really love. If anyone is curious, yeah, send me a message through my Instagram or website, and I can send you a list of poets that and books that have resonated with me for sure.
Beautiful.
Like when I do the lit circles, just one more thing to touch on this. The students, so say I teach 3 poetry books at a time, they'll all like different ones, So but Clint Smith is always a favorite. I tell you what, Counting Descent is always a hit for sure.
Mm-hmm. And I love what you said about, teaching poetry collections and not necessarily anthologies, but I will say anthologies are a good place to find poets that you like. You get an anthology and you'll have maybe 30 to 60 poets in one. And if you really like their work, then you can look up their whole book and maybe want to teach their collection. So Oh, and a small plug. I did edit an anthology a couple years ago. It's called Fight Evil with Poetry, and it's 30 different poets from all different backgrounds and all different sexual orientations and things like that. And so it's a good place to discover some poets. Yeah.
Did y'all make t-shirts?
Mm-hmm.
I have your t-shirt, the Fight Evil with Poetry t-shirt.
Oh, that's
I have
funny.
it.
Yeah. No, yeah.
I didn't know that was you. That's
oh,
so
yeah.
cool.
So I have, that's right there on the wall. Yeah.
Hey man, I'm on your
Yeah.
team. Okay.
Yeah, so it's an anthology. It's yeah, you can buy it online, and all the online sales, the proceeds, 100% of them go to different literary nonprofits. So yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you all. So here's the question. I think it's just a great one as we think about, moving our students from like readers to poetry to writers of poetry. And so, seems like part of teaching living poets is also inviting students to perform their own work. So is that a part of something that you would recommend? And is there a digital tool like Flipgrid that might support students that are new to it, or they want to practice before they go live? What do you recommend around that performance piece when students are just starting out?
Yeah, Flipgrid's great. I have used Flipgrid before. In my own personal experience, I've run into trepidation. Students are nervous to get like up and share out loud in front of their peers. And so I usually will just do the little bits, like everyone read a line, right? And if a student wants to share their whole poem, they do, and some do. But yeah, anxiety is a real thing right now. I mean, it has been for years, but I think it's just, we're finally realizing like, I know for me, like how much it really affects some of my students. And so I'm trying, and this is a question I ask myself, right? Like I'm trying to find this balance of how do I get them to share, but yet feel comfortable at the same time. And so, yes, this is a question I wish I knew the answer to.
I have a different approach. I respect everything you just said, but I'm not in the classroom on a regular, but I do regularly go into high schools locally and do creative writing workshops. I'll take over the English class for like, the week or whatever. I require everyone to share, but I say, hey, we're writing about a lot of, personal things. So if there are certain things you want to skip, feel free to do that. You don't have to share anything that's too intimate or too personal. However, this is part of your grade of participating. And so I have seen, as scared as they are, so often I really set the tone. I say, hey, this is not easy to do. And it takes a lot of courage to get up here. And if you hear something that you relate to or resonate, or someone's poem moves you, make sure you let them know both during and after the poem. Snap. If you hear something you relate to, go up to that your classmate and tell them you appreciated what they had to say. And the way that I have seen students come alive, the quiet student that doesn't say anything will get up there and read this poem that you're like, where did that come from? And then all of the students are like, yeah. And like to see like the shy kid just have the whole class cheering for them as they're reading their poem, it's amazing. And that's part of why even if they're scared, I do require it. I'm like, this is not optional. I mean, if you don't do it, you will fail this and grade this particular thing, whatever. And so yeah, kids are scared, but I have found like once the ball gets rolling and people see the reaction of the other students, a lot of times it's like, okay, I'm gonna do mine now. I say, hey, if you need to go up there with a friend, you can have a friend stand next to you, and whatever the thing is. But I do feel like the sharing it adds a whole nother layer of the experience of them hearing each other's voices, and students that they thought they had nothing in common with will read a poem, be like, oh snap, your dad is abusive too, or oh snap, you like anime too, or like, and all of a sudden like kids are making connections that they didn't have with their own peers.
Thank you both for just sharing the power of poetry, the power of spoken word, the power of teaching living poets, and the power of inviting our students to use their voices around their in their community of writers in the classroom. So we just got a few minutes left, so I'll invite Carol to join us on video, and she's got some really exciting news and an offer for everyone that's still on the call.
Okay. First of all, I want to thank both of you. Micah, your reading was so powerful, and Melissa, you gave us so many, practical, exciting strategies that make poetry accessible to kids and make them want to read and write it. And so thank you both for that. We want to encourage everyone who got a little kernel of something to work on that and submit it to the zine. That would be really fun to see some of you represented at the end of the series. We wanted to announce that we have a one-day virtual conference on December 15th. The theme is The Way Forward, Creating Engaging and Equitable Literacy Practices for K-12 Learners. The keynote speakers are Cornelius Minor and Troy Hicks. And we also have Micah is doing 2 workshops, Jennifer Fletcher, Maisha Wynn, and many, many more. And we want the people who attend this series, our 3-part series, we want to give you a 50% discount to the one-day workshop as a result of having participated. And you will use a discount code that says learning50, and that gets you the 50% off. And we're going to put the program brochure for the entire one-day conference in the chat. And we'll also remind you of the discount code. So please join us. That should be a super, super exciting day. And also just a note about this series that if you need a certificate that shows that you participated over the 3-part series, you can go to writecenter.org and complete a brief feedback form, and that will double as your certificate of participation. So we want to thank all of you for joining us. We hope you come back for Julia Torres and April Baker Bell, and we'll see you in the next 2 webinars. So thank you so much. And again, thank you, Micah and Melissa.
Welcome.
Okay, see you soon. Bye-bye.